Well,
You want a laser pointer?
no, I think I'm going to be good.
I've got one.
Oh, okay, I'll take one.
Okay, go ahead and start.
So this talk is also in large part due to my wife, who, these are our ideas. I guess she was like Moses and I'm like Aaron, I'm going to do the speaking. And we're really excited about being part of United Israel in its 75th year. So I'm just going to give you a little preface about, where I'm coming from so you can understand this. All right, thank you. All right, so United Israel, just to remind people, is a 501c3 education research organization. The idea is it's not a religion, and that's one of the things that, I think is important. So, in light of that statement, this is my look at education and research on the concept of faith. And so before I begin my talk, I wanted to offer a preface to give you some context. This is not a usual talk about faith and an exegesis of the Bible and what it said and all that kind of things. It's in part that, but it's about a lot of other things. One of the things about United Israel is that it's a very loose gathering of people, and some people have very different points of view, and we're allowed to have that. And I really cherish that. I would have never joined United Israel if it was something else. So this is developed in the light of my reckoning of wisdom and mythology and theology of the Hebrew Bible and other sacred and secular writings, as well as leading my full and interesting life. So these are kind of looking back, starting to look back. When you finish your 60s, when you finish your 50s and you're going to be 60, and things start to really kind of, you start looking back. Well, that was 30 years ago. Well, that was 40 years ago. And you don't realize that you're no longer a 20-something or 30-something. We also realize, this, which has already been said today, we affirm the truths of the Hebrew Scriptures that are committed to the vision of the Hebrew prophets and the ideals of the kingdom. This fits perfectly with what I'm going to talk about today, and it also fits perfectly with where we're coming from, so that's why we're here. So there is some non-attribution. This is my personal philosophy, some of this, and it's speculation. One of the things that you have to understand is that we must start to think differently if we're going to get going to go further in certain areas. I can just say this: that the talk that Ralph gave today, and the talk that James gave, and Ross's every weekend talk, they have come to such a great level over the years. They're constantly improving it, and that's the one thing that I really like about this organization. We're not just sitting there going over the same things all the time. We're looking deeper and trying to find the bigger question as to why. James was talking about that. This might sound a little bit arrogant and presumptuous, but it's not only for those here today, but also for the world's collective progeny. Because a lot of issues concerning faith are being brushed aside, and we're kind of looked at as the ignorant or the crazy people. And so a lot of young people have no faith. They're agnostic, to say the best. So I want to talk to those people also. And be forewarned, it's a synopsis of what I believe today, and it's subject to change. I believe that faith is an organic, living, and ever-changing thing. And if your faith stops growing and your knowledge stops increasing, your faith is no longer a living one. I believe that you'll miss out a lot about life if you let that dry up. So some thoughts before we go forward. The greatest barrier to learning is thinking you already know what I'm going to say, or thinking I already know what I'm going to say. Loved George Harrison's last interview on TV, and he said, "I get confused when I look around the world. Everybody's running around, and as Bob Dylan said, he not busy being born is busy dying. And yet nobody's trying to figure out what's the cause of death and what happens when you die. That to me is the only thing of any real importance. The rest is all secondary." George Harrison, of course, he had cancer and he knew he was going to die when he said this. So it's also about seeing the forest through the trees. James's talk really had a lot. I really love that talk, and I had a really good feeling about that talk because it's a lot of how I see things as well. Obviously, James has influenced us, but we've been running on our own trying to figure things out and listening to all kinds of people. But sometimes seeing the forest through the trees is a little difficult because you're so involved in the exegesis of the Bible, you don't look at the bigger things. Some people are so worried about what they're going to do on the Sabbath, they miss the meaning of the Sabbath and those kinds of things. So I look at, there's different types of exegesis, and here you can see there's the biblical and other sacred literature. It's important. I always remember Ernest Martin. He had an incredible way of looking at other documents and seeing how that might have impacted the biblical interpretation. I didn't always agree with Ernest, don't get me wrong, but he really was great at the idea of what we call in mathematics the theory of constraint. In other words, these constraints are on the problem, so the solution set's only so big. Solutions out that side of that slot would not be in. So the cultural and historical, and of course the personal, you have to look at yourself a great deal and do the introspection. One of the things I always liked was that we really should, in the Western civilization, meditate more. And of course, praying we do. And as Deepak Chopra said, praying is talking to God, meditating is listening. Mm-hmm. And sometimes you got to listen to God and look a little beyond. James also brought this up, so I think we're really synchronized. The Greco-Roman and pagan influence on religion, not biblical religions, despite their assertions. Now, he is an atheist Jew at Harvard, but he does write some good books. And what he's talking about is, well, look at the Bible and look at the way they practice. And you hear Ross talk about careful to say or not to say anything that it doesn't say. Also, another one. I think the Greek New Testament is the strongest and most successful misreading of a great prior text in the entire history of influence. King had written a great paper, The Influence of the Mystery Religions on Christianity. So Dr. King knew this. And of course, I did not add this. This was in my talk before James said it. Hellenism and Romanism rule today, and both Christianity and Judaism show influence, David Horowitz, in the UIWU Creed. I think when I saw that at the end of the Creed, I was like, I'm in. Because that's how I saw the world beginning as a Roman Catholic. I have shown this slide before, but the navigation of the soul, we really have to look differently. So I'm in New York, and so is David. And it's awful easy to go back to Athens or Greece and or Lhasa. But there really is the place that we're looking, sometimes called by the rabbis the navel of the earth, Jerusalem. And we have to see things from that. Medication. If you believe, this is after you watch. Upon the shoulders of giants. And of course, I stole that from a very famous scientist, but humans who have gone before and are with us still, who changed the world through their visions and increased the knowledge of humankind. There's too many to name. To the faithful, including those whom from ancient times have left a legacy of faith, those yet to come. People say, when's the end going to come? And when there might be people that need to be born that haven't been born yet. The next Moses or next David or Isaiah or whoever may not even be a twinkle in their parents' eye yet. So, in Jehovah's good time. My parents, I have to give them a lot of credit because it was a whacked out decade called the 60s. I want to talk a little bit about it. And they really gave us a chance to have the freedom to question. David Horowitz, you know, the more, and again, this dovetails on what Ralph said, but this guy that had this vision and legacy, I can't believe it, and I feel humbled that, of course, there's the great people in this aren't here, Ralph and Becky Button, Betty and Roger Gibbon, Brian Jones, Beth Holly. Thank you. There's other people that have influenced me, but I didn't have time. David and Sherry Cole, Jack and Joy Miller, James Walker, who's not here, Glenn Chatterton, Aaron Sandifer, and so many others. I don't want to leave it there. It goes on. But you also are my family and part of my understanding and how it's changed. Of course, my son who left, you know, his passing on what is faith and why in the hell I'm here. My son Jeremy Francis Tyler, who's now been the prodigal son, and now has our faith and wanted to be here, but he's busily working for us. But he now wants to read the Bible, and he's woken up, and that's a great thing. And of course to Patty, because we have been on a spiritual journey, and we've kept each other, you know, on that road. And I never, yeah, I could never have had another love like Patty. My wife, because we are partners, you know, we really are, and you know, I couldn't imagine life any other way. Of course, there's someone else that this is dedicated to, and it's so much I wish I could talk about today, but that would take several volumes of books. It'll be in volume 2, as Joel says. I believe his very name proclaims the creation and his greater purpose, and is holy and set apart. And that is how, when I pray, I see this brilliant light behind the name. And sometimes I just sit there and think of the name, and I don't think of anything else. And I just say, hey, you know what? Tell me where I should be. Help me. Give me signposts. Give me something. Tell me what you want. So let's take a spiritual journey. And you could come aboard my ship today. I'll be your captain. I've lived through enough of life and made enough decisions to be called a captain. We're going to consider the deeper meaning and the profound nature of what we call faith. It won't be a comfortable ride today. So those clouds, it shook us up. But raise your consciousness above the slugs that surround us, and use your intellect and think, because we're made like the Almighty. Let us remember the words of John Augustus Shedd, who said, a ship is safe in harbor, but that's not what ships are for. Trust or confidence in something, trust, belief, confidence. Mistrust is the lack of faith, right? Strong belief in God or the doctrines of a religion based on a spiritual apprehension rather than proof. Sometimes there isn't proof, right? And so we and see what they have to say. I don't know if you've ever heard this, but this quote made me just drop dead and start. I just cried when I read this quote. I believe in love, even when I don't feel it, and I believe in God, even when He's silent. It was found scratched in the wall at Auschwitz. I just couldn't believe that you know you're going to be. You believe in God. Trust an unknown future to a known God. That's Corrie ten Boom, the French priest. And of course, one of my favorite authors. All I have seen teaches me to trust the Creator. I love the fact that he used the word Creator. For all I have not seen. And that, of course, was Ralph Waldo Emerson. And if you've ever been to Massachusetts and been on that great pond, you know that he saw some of the truth. You know, the famous things like man's, you know, grasp shouldn't, you know, exceed his, man's reach should not exceed his grasp, and these great things. So we're going to talk about the profound concept called faith. So one of the things I wanted to start off with is we're born into the world in ignorance. When we're sitting in that crib, we really are very ignorant of intelligent, nothing like, we just don't have any data. Our data set is in front of us. And that is one of the biggest problems to overcome in your life. To see beyond what is obvious and what seems. And it takes effort to see what lays behind. We're brought up in the world to fit in. And look, be a good boy and go to school. I told my brother, don't go near women till you get your degree. You know, and of course, I left the room at 14 years old. But anyways, he's still single and I'm not. To adhere what society demands. I rebelled and thrive on rebelling against the status quo, so I can see what's going on. If we don't look at it from a different point of view, it's just not going to be. One of the things that I religion and all this, throw it out. Words and talking to other cultures. The Arabic language, they mean very different. Dave called even in our own language, it's that way. The idea also is bread as an example. It's time sensitive in the fifth and bread, and now it could mean other things, but it doesn't mean money. If I said, man, I need some bread, man, where you got any bread? They'd be like, you want whole wheat or? I think James has always done a good job in his books to say, at this point in time, this is what we believe the word meant. Philosophy, so that's what I'm talking about, my philosophy, and that's the study of the fundamental nature of knowledge, reality, and existence. All right? A particular system of philosophical thought. It's a study of theoretical basis of a particular branch of knowledge experience. So look at the synonyms, right? Thinking, thought, and reasoning. And a theory or attitude held by a person or an organization. We have a certain, very broad-ranging philosophy at United Israel. I'm going to go quickly through my journey and make it really quick. I was born in a different era, one that was fantastic. Our family had Maslow's hierarchy of needs met, meaning you have food, you have air, you have water, your parents love you, you go to school, you have friends. Everything's copacetic. If you remember the 1960s, it's not so. It started to come apart.
Wow, man.
And on TV, it came apart in front of us. Theological revolution, technological revolution, and space race. The Russians were sending satellites. You could look at them in the sky, and of course your mind goes crazy, right? Oh, are they reading my thoughts? Those damn Russians. Still dealing with those Russians today, aren't we? So there was also the Cuban Missile Crisis. I was in the emergency room when this happened. I had cut myself. And the panic in that emergency room is tenable, and I can feel it to this day. And say what you want, but man, John Kennedy played a good role in that. He really made a decision at the end. It was not popular with the military, but was the right decision. Then they assassinated him on TV. I saw my parents and my grandparents crying. Camelot was over, man, in one shot. You remember how Camelot was before that? It's gone. It wasn't Camelot for African Americans or Mexican Americans either, or Jews a lot of times. So there was also the social revolution, and if you want to, listen to the soundtrack of the '60s, you'll figure that out really quickly. And then the war started happening live on TV. Are you kidding me? Always won, man. Protest. They're burning down cities on TV. Now, you imagine a young kid thinking about this, seeing it live. People think things are crazy now. You had no idea. I'm going to tell you, unless you lived through it. Because you're saying, Detroit's burning, Compton's burning, New Jersey's burning, Washington's, we're burning the place down. I remember the cry was written in Compton. Burn, baby, burn, was written in spray paint. They started murdering famous people right in front of us on TV. It became a thing. And then religion was being questioned in every aspect. The good news is there were Bible groups popping up. Revolutionary times. January 5th, in Czechoslovakia, we had the Prague Spring. Just like we had the Arab Spring, but what did we do? We looked the other way. We let them go back, and it was brutal for those people. And January 23rd, North Korea. They're still on the news, aren't they? They captured a spy ship, the USS, the United States ship Pueblo. The Tet Offensive. Are you kidding me? Do you know what this was? This was on a religious day. The North Vietnamese and Cambodians got together, and they came and they just brutalized and killed many people. Martin Luther King was assassinated in Memphis, Tennessee on April 4th. Hundreds of students started gathering at the campus of Columbia University in New York City to protest the Vietnam War. And by May 6th, just a short time later, because it was on TV, it was all over the world. Robert F. Kennedy assassinated in Los Angeles. If this wasn't, if Camelot had a heartbeat, it was killed. It was a great man. And my parents, they were just destroyed when this happened. And then, if you remember the Democratic National Convention riots, I mean, you know, Daley really tried to clamp down, and it just got worse and out of control. It was madness in the world. And a good side, the Boeing introduced the way we traveled. Do you remember that? One, they held their black gloves up and stood on the. I mean, I'm like, I was a little kid. I'm empty. I don't know what's wrong. Why are they angry? Nixon won the election. I'm sorry. And then, of course, another land on the moon. It was a revolutionary year, and I don't think you understand. I'm trying to get you to where I'm coming from, to lay the foundation. So I had a day of revelation in the Roman Catholic Church in 1968. I was sitting in the back. My mother was a good Italian. My mother, Anna Goldberg, by the way, because that's what they thought she would look. And I was sitting in the pew, and it's the first time I ever had any kind of semblance of religion or faith. The Mass was over, and I turned around, and I looked at this crucifix, which, you know, the dead body of Jesus. That's God. And I walked out. I questioned it, and my mom and dad surprisingly just said, let's read. His name was James Stocker. He was a dropout from the Church of Christ. And he would say to me, David, don't believe what I say. Read the Bible and figure it out for yourself. What a great man. He was a very humble man, and I was privileged to do his funeral, or part of his funeral. Oh, yeah, we still have, and we play music, but I mean, we don't have Christmas trees. Or 1981, and our first date, we said, but Patty went for it. 1982, we had our first son, Daniel. In 1984, our second son, Jeremy. I obtained graduate degrees and started a business in 1985. In 1992, we met James Tabor and Dennis Jones via phone. And that story is for another time, but Patty said, he's got the same last name that's on my birth certificate. And called him here, and James answered the phone. That's unbelievable. So 1995, we made our first trip to Israel on business, and we got a guide in a limo who took us everywhere we wanted. He spoke 7 languages, and we were at the Kafar HaMaccabiyah, and for the first weekend, they were like, don't even come into business, go wherever you want. He wanted to take us to all the Christian spots. And we're like, no, we don't want to go to the Christian spots. So we went everywhere. Patty got her first camel ride. It was a beautiful time. We went to the Bedouins, and the Bedouin wanted 8D batteries for her camel ride. And of course, the limo driver had 8D batteries in the car. And after Patty's camel ride, he said, your wife is pretty, but she's worthless. I said, oh, okay, why? She's too small. You need a big woman. I said, why? In the summer they bring shade, in the winter they bring warmth. He had 4 of them, and they were big. So soon after that, we began following the biblical dietary rules, and I'm sure you've all had similar things. I don't want to go on too long about this because I do have a lot to say. But I remember going over to the first ham dinner where I told my mother, we're not eating that. And she looked at me like, you know, are you a Jew? Well, yeah, a praiser of God, yes I am. And now my mother, if you get near pork, she'll say, why are you eating the swine's flesh? You know, once someone comes new to a religion, all right? 2000s, we joined the United Israel World Union and became board members and ministers. We studied and followed the rules as best we could. We became increasingly successful, and everything we did was blessed, and we were protected by God is the way we looked at it. And we found a place where we could have a common faith. Life was beautiful, to quote the great movie by Roberto, I forget it was a one Academy Award. Yeah, thank you. Then we get a call that changed our life. A doctor calls and said, are you David Tyler? And I said, yes. He said, Daniel Tyler, your son? I said, yes. He said, he's dead. And in that shock is like, it's hard to fathom. Why did it happen? And of course, we asked the questions. You know, what did we do? I experienced grief as I never had. I was a mathematician, an expert in predicate calculus and solving complex analyses. Things can be resolved, but they couldn't be in this area. It was like waking up in a nightmare. Every morning I woke up, he's still dead, he will be dead. I had a beautiful mind. I really loved my mind. It could overcome anything except this. My thoughts that day, I won't go into them, but I do have a lot of guns, and they looked awful to stop the pain. Drugs and alcohol, you have to go somewhere, and I'm going to tell you where to go. There was people sobbing. What about the promises? What, you have faith? Really? You're a big shot. You have all this faith. Well, why are you on the back deck groveling, crying to God, and he's not talking to you? Where's your faith now, hotshot? So Ralph Bunton fed me some advice that day. That's why I love him so dearly. And he said, David, I'm going to let you know that I lost a son, oddly enough, 34 years before. And he said, it's like this. It's like you lost your hand. Learn how to live with one hand. Learn to live with it. And that's, Ralph, I think of that discussion every day. And then I started looking at my Bible, because that's what I do. And then I didn't ever think of this. The first parents, Adam and Eve, they lost Abel. The first parents. This is stunning. Soon after that, I was in the book of Exodus, and Simca wrote me, he says, Jakubowicz, he wrote to me, and he said, it's about the Aaron, and he sat in profound silence after his son's death, being struck down on the altar. He sat in profound silence. And that's where I was. 2 weeks later, Ross spoke about Judah and Jacob and their special bond, if you remember that lesson, on that they thought Judah could talk to Jacob. He lost Joseph, and Judah had lost sons, and it's probably a kinship that they felt. For Jacob, you know, Joseph came back. And then, of course, there's a lot of others, but David and Absalom, you know. Absalom wasn't even a nice son, but David mourned his loss like no other. And that I never saw until I lost my own son. So I read my great writers. Suffering has a noble purpose. The evolution of consciousness and the burning up of the ego. Eckhart Tolle. Remember that great love and great achievements involve great risk, i.e. you could lose your son, the Dalai Lama. And then, of course, one of the great rabbis that I love, pain is a reality, suffering is a choice. Rabbi Asher Resnick. Daniel was cremated. In Genesis 3:19 we read, in the sweat of thy face shalt thou eat bread. fact, I am hungry and I want some bread. Till thou return unto the ground, for out of it wast thou taken, for dust thou art, and unto dust thou shalt return. Well, when the Almighty says that, it's pretty much hard to get around. Genesis 18:27, and Abraham answered and said, Behold now, I have taken upon me to speak to the Lord. Who am I but dust and ashes? You know, these life breathers we talked about. Danny's body was donated to the Nebraska Organ Recovery, and we have officially been told 122 people used his body parts. You might disagree with me, but I really don't care. I see things differently now. It's one thing that did happen. We had a celebration of life, not a funeral. And many people came, including James and Lori, Ross Nichols, and Ronnie Fulcher drove I don't know how many miles. And Ricky Sullivan, my Baptist friend from Huntsville, came, and several hundred of other people. We had a singer there named Tammy Fleming. And let me tell you something. Daniel was a drummer, and he knew her son who was a drummer, and he died with liver cancer. My son played at his funeral. And there, this lady says, your son was there, and I want you to know about this. Apparently God needed a drummer. Are you kidding me? What are the odds? So once they were all gone, I saw another psalm that I'll never see again. My God, why hast thou forsaken me? Why are you so far from helping me and from the words of my groaning? Oh my God, I cry in the daytime, but you do not answer. And in the night, and I'm not silent. And I didn't sleep for the first 3 days. But then what does he say? But thou art holy, O thou that inhabitest the praises of Israel. It means a lot different to me now. Another rabbi said, and to whom much is given, of him shall much be required. And to whom they commit much, of him will they ask the more. Jesus of Nazareth. Then we had a really beautiful time. We went for a place with James and Lori on the ocean. And I had this thing called a walk on the beach. And I'm not saying God talked to me there, but that ocean did. And I saw eternity. And I told James, I want to write a book. And that's what this is, the basis of what you're going to see. And he said, write it down. And I started writing it down. I would get up in the middle of the night and write one sentence in what I call my scratch pad. So what is death? Gives importance and value to time. Time would become meaningless if there were too much of it. Raymond Kurzweil, one of the smartest people alive. In 1809, the philosopher William Godwin wrote, the enormity of death is the greatest of earthly calamities. Who dies? I agree with that. Not because the dead are comfortably at the mercy of God, but because the dead are no more than they were before they were unborn. Of course, Isaiah, for Sheol cannot thank you. Death cannot praise you. Those who go down to the pit cannot hope for thy faithfulness. The dead do not praise the Lord or Jehovah, nor do they. Is from the one who does not exist. Thanksgiving has ceased. He who is alive and well sings the Lord's praises. So I wanted to say, well, what is a name and more? So I asked James Tabor for the TEV version of this, and it's just stunning. Mighty One, look, I come towards the sons of Israel. And they say to me, what is his name? What shall I say toward them? I will be who I will be. That's powerful. And he said, thus you shall say to the sons of Israel, I will be has sent me toward you. Now, this is something that's really amazing. There are four powers that guide the universe the way we know it. And I'm not saying this is God, but this is how God acts, right? So there's the electromagnetic, the strong nuclear gravity, and weak nuclear forces. And his name is 4 letters long. And I want to get into it, but I've done a lot of study on this, and this is something I think, it's how he, there's still a consciousness besides the power, I'm not saying that. If he thought only of himself and withdrew his spirit, which is his dust, that's who the Creator is in a way. It's the power. The Creator's in this room right now, causing it to exist right now. Without it, we're nothing. And don't ever think you're something. So the big questions in the big picture. The one persists in trying to adapt himself to the world. Therefore, all progress depends on the unreasonable man. George Bernard Shaw. Wisdom from the book of Proverbs. By wisdom Jehovah laid the foundations of the earth. By understanding he established the heavens. By his knowledge the deep waters were divided and the skies dropped dew. What I have discovered. Knowledge can be communicated, but not wisdom. One can find it, live it, be fortified it, and do wonders through it. But one cannot communicate and teach it. Herman Hesse insists. They're easy to understand once they're discovered. The point is discovering them. Galileo Galilei. So science and faith is what I'm going to talk about, and that is that whenever conflict arises between religion and science, it is due to human error, either through the misinterpretation of religious scriptures or the lack of a more complete understanding of science. If religious teachings diverge from science, they should not be accepted to be as reasonable as we have been born with the reason. Faith from another famous rabbi, this time, to improve our state of society is revealed to us the laws which are to state of intellectual culture. And we must first form a conception of the existence of a creator according to our capabilities. That is, we must have a knowledge. To the study of science and physics borders on metaphysics and must even precede it in the course of our studies, as it is clear to all. How do you even frame the problem? And a great scientist, another Jew, after Einstein, a Jew who was probably the greatest. I would rather have questions that can't be answered than answers that can't be questioned. Scientific method. So in fact, most scientists, myself included, have found that if you dismiss out of hand all claims of you will be right 95% of the time. So skepticism is rewarded, but every once in a while, there will be that rare occasion when you are wrong, and so you may have missed an important discovery because of it. Dr. Richard Mueller. View of the world now, I call it reductive materialism, and that is that somehow that became a life, and then we became conscious. And the view of how people see the world today. At the low end, there's the quantum mechanics, right? At the high end, there's the theory of relativity, theory of everything. I wanted to say something. It's just something I happened to notice. Leonard Susskind, Albert Einstein, Max Planck, Werner Heisenberg, and Niels Bohr. And Werner Heisenberg, you love the Jews so much, you're a white Jew and you need to be killed. Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, one of the greatest scientists. So, who and what the heck are we? Well, James used this today, and I didn't put this in there because of him. What the Bible says, and God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds, and so forth. So, we're part of the, I have when I talk to people, and I don't have it here, but to other people that might hear this, God is a bad word. It's Greco-Roman feel to it. And we're using it correctly here today, but I'm just saying, be careful when you use that word. and I'll use it among you because you know who. There's a difference between Elohim and Jehovah. There's a big difference. Because people were called Elohim too, right, in the Bible. So, what science says different, is there's a difference that I want to talk about, and that's the origin of life and evolution. There's very difference that we go over too quickly. And how do we categorize things? Then I'm going to talk about the levels of consciousness. So there's a lot of problems with the chemical origin of life. Evolution and the origin of life are two different subjects. People believe that as the people of the Africa and the Middle East migrated north, they became lighter skinned because they needed to absorb vitamin D. I'm not saying that didn't happen. That's an evolutionary thing. Dogs, the Cocker Spaniel of the 1920s is not recognizable today because we got involved with its evolution. The theory of life, meaning these dead things, these carbon molecules popped into life. That is something that we really cannot find a solution for. So there's no viable mechanism to generate the primordial soup, which they say it came out of. And they have tried for years, decades, to create this primordial soup and then shock it. Life's going to happen. No, it doesn't.
That's right.
Forming polymers requires the dehydration synthesis. It was not available. You could not have formed it. The RNA lacks any confirming evidence. Unguided chemical processes cannot explain the origin of the genetic code. I'm not going to get into these, but I do have books on this. And there's no workable model for the origin of life. Sorry, scientists. Doesn't mean there won't be, but I'm just saying you don't have one right now. And there's another issue with evolution as the sole designer, and I'll go through these quickly. Lack of a viable mechanism for producing high levels of complex and specified information. The failure of the fossil record to provide support for Darwinian evolution. Oh yeah, there's big gaps, and they say we're going to find them, but they haven't. And these gaps are billions of years and hundreds of millions of years wide. I'm just saying. I'm not trying to be mean here to the scientists. The failure of molecular biology to provide evidence of the grand tree of life in DNA. The natural selection is a very inefficient method. There's not enough time to spread the traits in a population. The problem of convergent evolution appears rampant at both the genetic and morphological levels, even though under Darwinian theory, this is highly unlikely through their own theory. Another thing is the failure of chemistry to explain the origin of the genetic code, which is the first thing I talked about. The failure of developmental biology to explain the vertebrate embryos diverged from the beginning of development. The failure of the neo-Darwinian evolution to explain the biogeographical distribution of many species. A long history of inaccurate predictions inspired by neo-Darwinism regarding the vestigial organs of the so-called junk DNA. And there's another thing. We were out there having fun last night, singing and talking, smoking cigars, which cut our life short, drinking, which cuts our life short. But we do these things, music, art, religion, that behavioral and cognitive traits that are way too different, and they don't mean that we're going to live better. We're not going to survive. That isn't survival of the fittest. Just quickly, we're going to categorize the known universe, living and non-living, and then there's the living things include 7 levels, and you've probably had this in your biology classes. And then we know them as the single cell Monera and Protus. Those are the 2 single cell kind of kingdoms. The fungi or the mushrooms, which is not in the Hebrew diet, but we still like mushrooms. Plants, and then animals. So the animal kingdom is by far the most numerous. So there's 8.7 million species. So we're different. We have what is known as that long-range consciousness, meaning we can retain perceptions, cogitate on them, abstract from them, then recombine the abstractions into new concepts. This allows for sapience, and we have consciousness of our consciousness. We're called Homo sapiens sapiens. We are we're conscious of our consciousness, and we can build our knowledge, increasing the amount of sapience we contain in our minds. Anthropologist Lauren Isley said, as much as we love animals, they live in the eternal. So they are conscious. So what does this mean? Because I do love my dogs. Consciousness is a state of being awake and aware of one's surroundings. It's now being determined that even plants are conscious. Extremely low level, but the Germans are studying this and it's coming through. It'll come through. So like life contains consciousness. While all animals are essentially conscious, the most evolved are at best sentient. And we'll go to get to this discussion here. However, mankind is both sentient and sapient. To feel, perceive, or experience subjectively. In our modern Western philosophy, sentience is the important thing known in philosophy of mind as qualia. Remember what I just said. In Eastern philosophy, it's the quality of all things that require respect and care. So sapience, the noun of sapient, is the ability to think and to reason, and it may not seem like much of a difference, but the ability to reason is are sentient. Yep, your lovely dog is sentient, but only humans are sapient. So where is this described? I'm going to go back to Genesis 1:26. It is, we're made like God. He made us in His image. I don't even like to use the term His, and I'm not trying to be like the University of California at Davis to say there shouldn't be any pronouns, but what I am trying to say is that I don't think God is male or female. It's more than that, or the sum of those things. So beyond consciousness, sentience, and sapience is faith. And again, the animals don't have this. So we're guaranteed in human development to be able to understand what data is, and then data collected is called information, and then information worked on is called knowledge. And every human, unless they have mental issues, can do this. What's not guaranteed, and we could look to Solomon because he told us this, is wisdom. Consciousness rises as we go, and when we get up to the point of wisdom, that's kind of the crown, is what Solomon said. So over here, consciousness is down at the bottom. Animals have a thing to look at, data, right? They're like, data, lion, bad, eat me, run, or something like that. And they are sentient, because they can say, if I keep digging here, I'm going to find China. No, my huskies dig in the backyard. They do smart. If you look at a beaver pond, you know that there's sentience going on. It's amazing. I have what I call the Hilton. It is the largest beaver pond I've ever seen, and in the middle of this lake, they made the lake. There is a 17 or 18 foot tall beaver mansion, and there's a whole lot of beaver in there. Of course, then there's the crown, sapient and sentient, and that's what we are. Why are we here talking about this subject today? Because we're sapient. There was some ancient books about this. Oh no, yeah, remember, like Ralph said, they're also known as the books of wisdom, right? And there are 7 of those books: the book of Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, the book of wisdom, the Song of Songs, and of course Ecclesiasticus or Sirach. Not all the Psalms are wisdom. In Judaism, the books of wisdom, other than Sirach or Ecclesiastes, some versions of Christian Bibles, they are all considered. And of course, these books were included in other religions besides Judaism. So the Zoroastrians include these books. What happens is, due to our sapient nature, technology has increased at an accelerated rate. That technological singularity could happen, naturally take over the world, perhaps. They're going to be thinking, but they're going to be making decisions without emotion. The phones are made without almost any human intervention right now. John von Neumann and Stanislaw, and some polls were conducted in 2013, 2040 or 2050. Stephen Hawking and Elon Musk expressed their concerns. And these are not stupid people. So the thing that changed everything was quantum mechanics. And that's a fundamental theory of physics that describes the nature at the smallest scales of energy levels in atoms. So classical physics, which was Newton and so forth, is a set of fundamental theories which describes the nature at ordinary or macroscopic scale. Quantum mechanics looks at the lower levels through a process called quantization. Oddly enough, quantization was developed by Albert Einstein. I mean, not only did he do the big one, but he really gave the theory for the small one. So he did relativity, right? But he also did the small one. He didn't agree with what they did with it. So there's a new paradigm. So paradigm is just, you know, an example or pattern of something, a model. And we got to look at that. A set of terms that we form mutually exclusive choices and peculiar synaptic role. So one of the things we must ask is, what is the most profound mystery in biology? Consciousness. It just doesn't make any sense. When they look at what consciousness is and try to describe it in scientific terms, they give you attributes, but they don't know what it is. Robert Lanza. So consciousness is the state of being awake and aware of one's surroundings. So we had to revamp it. So in 2007, Robert Lanza, who will surely win a Nobel Prize in his STEM research, is an American medical doctor and a PhD. And we're create. And that consciousness in the beginning could be Jehovah, but we also do that. So it's an idealistic look at the universe, and it really has to be thought about in a great way. So there's 7 principles, and what we perceive as reality is a process that involves our consciousness. I know you're going to find it hard to believe, but this is what quantum mechanics tells us. Once we look at something, we've changed its outcome. Hard to fathom, right? Also, time and space are just figments of our imagination. We're truly spiritual beings. Our external and internal perceptions are inextricably intertwined, and they're different sides of the same coin. The behavior of subatomic particles, indeed all particles, is inextricably linked to the presence of an observer. Now, you might think that observer has to be conscious, but you might think that's crazy, but I'm going to let you know who else believes this. So without consciousness, matter dwells in an undetermined state of probability, and the universe could have preceded consciousness, only existed in a probability state. So it didn't just happen. Another principle is the structure of the universe is explainable only through biocentrism. We'll get into that in a moment. Time does not have a real existence outside the animal sense perception. It is a process by which we perceive changes in the universe. So people look at time as like a parameter that actually exists, but it's just perceived. Space, like time, is not an object or thing. It's another form of our animal understanding. So we're going to talk about that. There's a great book you should read. It's called Just 6 Numbers by Martin Rees. First of these numbers is letter N, the ratio of the strength of electrical force to gravitational force. Second one defines how strongly atomic nuclei bind together. Third, mega measures the amount of material in the entire universe. Fourth number, lambda, has only resurfaced recently, but it relates to an assumed anti-gravity effect that modifies the rate of expansion of the universe. The fifth number, represented by the letter Q, relates to the degree of structure in the universe, and the sixth number is the number of dimensions. If these weren't exactly the way they are, we wouldn't exist. Another guy, Gerald Schroeder, wrote a book about the Big Bang, and that's perspective of the point of origin of the Big Bang. According to Einstein's equations of the stretching factor, time dilates by a factor of roughly 1 trillion, and would appear to pass on one day from that point due to the stretching of space. When you apply to the 13.8 billion years that we see towards the beginning of the universe, we're really only in the 6th day. And that's just mind-boggling if you read Genesis and the Big Bang. In fact, Anthony Flew, an academic philosopher who promoted atheism for most of his. So the quantum effect, the observer causes the problem, and that's really what we're at. The observer causes the problem. And so if you check your air tire, you've changed the air tire. It's a simple way of looking at it. And when you shine a light on something, So one of the unusual versions of the observer effect that occurs in quantum mechanics, I'm going to give you the picture, that way we can get to it. A great pointer here. So this tells you a single slit you're only going to get would be two similar patterns. But if you check what's happening, it changes. If you just look at it, it changes. Now, how that is it a wave or a particle? Well, it's a particle unless we look at it. Then it becomes a wave. What? You're looking at it? And of course, you'd heard, my wife just heard that this crazy effect of entanglement also was just proven. Einstein's, that it's entangled with another spins, the entangled particle spins in the opposite way.
They could be galaxies apart.
They could be galaxies apart. Obviously, that's faster than any speed of light. How did that happen? Well, you know, it is what it is. Double slit is so mind-boggling. It was proven in Germany, and here's what happens. So the double slit happens, and you don't observe anything, or you could observe it. Then you have another double slit. You have two more double slits, and then you look back at this double slit. So if you observe this double slit, time already happened. Well, it's called reverse quantum effect. Truth is stranger than fiction. So von Neumann and Wigner said this causes the collapse of the wave function is an interpretation of quantum mechanics in which consciousness is postulated to be necessary for the completion of the process of quantum measurement. And these are not shallow people. These are the supporting scientists: Wigner, Wheeler, Stapp, Penrose, Kafatos, Niels Bohr, Werner Heisenberger, Schrödinger, Max Planck. These are the smartest people that have been in the last century. They all agreed that this was the case. It's not really taught in high school physics. So anyone who was not shocked by quantum theory has not understood it. And in reply to Albert Einstein's quote, "God doesn't play dice with the universe," Niels Bohr said, "Einstein, don't tell God what to do." Both Jews. In fact, the observer is rooted in scientific experiments. There's nothing you can do to change that. There's a great Japanese scientist, Masaru Emoto, and he looked at water and with and without prayer. And there's photos and everything of this. And he looked at water that was being frozen, and he found not only that the effect of prayer that was on it was amazing, but also the health of the water also had an effect on it. So you're praying, and the ones you pray clearer and cleaner water, a great study. So just to so the smallest unit of time, or quanta, which Einstein proposed, is the time it takes for light to travel Planck's length, or called Planck's time. Since distance and velocities less than this are meaningless. So the fastest speed attainable is the speed of light. So if we take the smallest length divided by the fastest speed, we get what it takes. Planck's length is about 1.6 times 10 to the minus 35th meters. That is 1.6. Speed of light is 10 times 10 to the 8th meters. 39 times 10 to the minus 44 seconds. I'm going to help you with this. So how are memories saved in God's mind? Well, there are 5.399 times 10 to the 4th quanta in a second. That's what that number looks like. Now you want to know how God sees things differently than us? Let me give you a close example. How beautiful are CDs? They're sampled 44,000 times a second. All right, let's go here. So where do the memories go? In accordance with quantum, they're not anywhere. Consciousness views them. And this includes every thought or the ether of the overall reality of our science, not me. Every thought and experience of everyone ever. And let me throw ever. So your dog, every thought your dog ever had or every experience is memorized in incredible detail. And it's no longer in the present because it's past and it's in an unobserved state. But the mind of God is that unobserved state, as well as the observed. That's who has the control. And believe me, when I looked at this, and there's a lot more I'd have. There are two ways to live. You can live as if nothing is a miracle. A Jew who doesn't believe in miracles is not a realist. David Ben-Gurion, we spoke of him today. And revealed yesterday, we wouldn't have understood it. An incredible thinker from New York named David Tyler. So this is the way forward. The Godhead, the way we see things in our faith. Supreme, there is no delegated authority, no saints to pray to, no intermediaries. A better lesson. Scriptures, the Hebrew Bible, beliefs, existence of all the tribes of Israel, their birthright covenants, people who share benefits and blessings. Observance, all the Mosaic laws, to the extent we can, all the holy days. I love this. And then finally, his last little jab, Hellenism, Romanism, right? Which we've already read. The souls of the dead, I read the Book of Wisdom, and this. The souls of the just are in the hand of God, and no torment shall touch them. They seemed, in the view of the foolish, to be dead, and they're passing away as though an affliction, and they're ongoing forth from us, utter destruction, but they are in peace. Now this Book of Wisdom was written, apparently, by a Jewish man trying to get back young Jewish people who were being influenced by the paganism of the day. So it's not some parting thoughts. Accept what is, let go of what was, and have faith. Death is no more than the passing from one. Because in that other room, I shall be able to see Helen Keller. We're not human beings having a spiritual experience. We are spiritual beings having a human experience. In 1955, when Michel Beslow died, Albert Einstein wrote, "Now he has departed from this strange world, a little ahead of me. That means nothing. People like us who believe in physics know that the distinction between past, present, and future is only a stubbornly persistent illusion." Of course, this one, time is too slow for those who wait, too swift for those who fear, too long for those who grieve, too short for those who rejoice. But for those who love, time is eternity. Henry Van Dyke. So, final thought from the Creator, and from one of my favorite books, Isaiah. "And he will destroy in this mountain the face of the covering that covereth all peoples," and that veil that's over us, where we can't see the real truth. We peer behind it, the veil that is spread over all nations. "He hath swallowed up death forever, and the Lord Jehovah will wipe away tears from all their faces, and the reproach of these people will he take away from off all the earth."